I was standing at the front desk, pen in my hand, about to sign away everything I had built over a lifetime, when a detective stepped in and told me one sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew. Don't sign that. In that moment, I realized the people I trusted most had been quietly planning to take my life from me, not with violence, but with signatures, documents, and lies carefully crafted to look like love. What followed was not just betrayal, it was a battle for control, dignity, and truth that I never saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 67 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I worked as a chief accountant in Chicago, Illinois. Numbers have always made more sense to me than people. They follow rules. They reveal truth if you know where to look. People, on the other hand, tend to hide what matters most beneath layers of intention and silence. That difference is something I learned early, and it has stayed with me far longer than any job ever did. I live in the same house my husband and I bought more than 3 decades ago. It sits on a quiet street lined with tall trees that change color every fall, just like they always have. The house is not extravagant, but it is solid, carefully maintained, and filled with memories that refuse to fade. Every room carries a trace of the life we built together. After he passed, the silence became heavier, but I learned how to carry it. I built routines to keep my days structured: morning coffee by the kitchen window, reviewing my accounts and investments, light reading in the afternoon. Order gave me comfort, and control gave me peace. For a while, I believed that would be enough. Then Daniel moved back in. My son used to be decisive, the kind of man who made plans and followed through. Somewhere along the way, that certainty dissolved. His business failed, and with it, something inside him seemed to collapse. When he asked if he and his wife could stay with me for a while, I did not hesitate. That is what mothers do. We make room, even when we suspect it might cost us something later. Olivia came with him, and from the beginning, she was everything one might expect from a considerate daughter-in-law. She was composed, attentive, and always aware of how she presented herself. She spoke carefully, listened when it mattered, and moved through the house as if she had always belonged there. At first, I appreciated her presence. She brought energy into a space that had grown too quiet, but appreciation slowly turned into observation. It started with small things. Olivia reorganized the kitchen without asking, explaining that it would make everything more efficient. She adjusted the thermostat, saying I might feel more comfortable with a different temperature. She began asking about my schedule, suggesting minor changes as if she were helping me manage my time. None of it seemed unreasonable on its own. In fact, each action could easily be mistaken for care, yet there was a pattern forming beneath it. Daniel noticed it too, I think, but he never said anything. Instead, he grew quieter. He avoided direct conversations with me, often letting Olivia speak for both of them. When I looked at him, I no longer saw the same confidence he once carried. I saw hesitation, dependence, a kind of distance that felt unfamiliar. Then the questions began. Olivia started asking about my finances in ways that sounded casual, but were anything but. She wanted to know how my accounts were structured, how I managed my investments, whether I had considered updating certain legal documents. She framed everything as concern, as preparation, as something practical and responsible. I answered politely, but I never gave more than necessary. I have spent too many years reading between lines to ignore instinct. There is a difference between helping and positioning, between concern and calculation. Most people never learn to tell the difference. I did. Still, I did not confront her. Not yet. I watched. I listened. I let the days unfold as they would, even as something inside me began to shift. Because in my experience, the most dangerous changes never arrive all at once. They begin quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize everything around you has already moved. And by then, it is usually too late. The first time Olivia suggested I was becoming forgetful, she said it lightly, almost playfully, as if it were something we could both laugh about. I remember exactly where we were standing. I had just finished balancing my monthly accounts at the dining table, and she leaned against the kitchen counter with a smile that seemed carefully measured. She mentioned that I had asked the same question twice the day before. I knew I had not. Still, I let it pass. Over the next few weeks, those comments became more frequent. It was always something small. She would point out that I misplaced my glasses, even when they were exactly where I had left them. She would remind Daniel, within my hearing, that I seemed more distracted lately. Each remark was wrapped in concern, but there was a pattern forming beneath it. A narrative, repeated often enough that it might begin to sound true to someone who did not know better. I knew better. My routines had not changed. I still reviewed every account personally, still kept detailed notes, still remembered figures and dates with the same clarity I had relied on throughout my career. There was no confusion, no decline, only observation. 3 weeks before my birthday, I walked into my home office and found Olivia standing behind my desk. She had one of my folders open and her phone in hand, angled toward the documents. She did not startle when she saw me. Instead, she lowered the phone slowly and smiled, as if she had been expecting me. She told me she was organizing things, making copies in case I ever needed help managing paperwork. Her tone was calm, reassuring, almost practiced. Daniel was in the hallway, close enough to hear everything, yet he said nothing. He did not step forward. He did not question her. He simply stood there, avoiding my eyes. That silence told me more than any explanation could. From that moment on, I stopped questioning whether something was wrong. I began asking myself how far it might go. Olivia's involvement in my daily life became more deliberate after that. She asked about my appointments, suggested changes to my schedule, and occasionally spoke as if decisions had already been made on my behalf. None of it was overtly aggressive. It did not need to be. Control, when done well, rarely announces itself. Then came the birthday gift. She presented it at breakfast, her voice bright, her expression almost too enthusiastic. A luxury spa retreat, she said, located in Naperville, a place where I could relax, unwind, and let professionals take care of me for a day. She described treatments, quiet spaces, and personalized care. Everything sounded appealing on the surface, yet something in her delivery felt strained. Daniel supported the idea, but his voice lacked conviction. He did not look at me when he spoke. Instead, he focused on his coffee cup, as if it required all of his attention. I watched him carefully, searching for the man he used to be, and found only hesitation. I agreed to go. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. The house had settled into silence, but not the comfortable kind I had grown used to. There were voices downstairs, low and urgent. I could not make out the words, only the tone. It carried the weight of planning, of something that required precision. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the pieces arrange themselves. I had spent decades studying patterns, understanding how small details connect into something larger. What I was seeing now followed a pattern I recognized all too well. This was not concern. This was preparation. And whatever awaited me at that so-called retreat, it was not meant to help me. I closed my eyes, already knowing that when morning came, I would walk into it anyway, because sometimes the only way to understand a trap is to step close enough to see how it is built. The next morning arrived with a quiet clarity that felt almost unnatural. I was awake before the alarm, already dressed, already prepared. There was no hesitation left in me, only a steady awareness that whatever waited ahead would confirm what I had begun to suspect. Olivia knocked on my door precisely at 8. She was dressed in crisp, neutral tones, her posture controlled, her smile just slightly too bright. I noticed the tension in her hands before anything else. They were still, but not relaxed. We left within minutes. The drive began in familiar territory, the streets of Chicago unfolding in their usual rhythm, but it did not stay that way for long. As we moved farther out toward Naperville, the surroundings changed. Residential warmth gave way to something quieter, more clinical. Fewer people, fewer signs of ordinary life. Olivia filled the silence with casual conversation, describing treatments and amenities, but her voice carried a strain she could not quite hide. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened whenever the road opened up, as if she were guiding us towards something she could not afford to question. I watched everything. When the building finally came into view, I felt a calm settle over me that surprised even myself. It was not a spa. It never had been. The structure was modern, with reflective glass and clean lines, more suited to a private medical facility than a place of relaxation. Cameras were mounted discreetly along the exterior. The entrance required controlled access. Nothing about it suggested comfort. Everything about it suggested containment. Olivia stepped out quickly and gestured for me to follow. There was a subtle urgency in the way she moved, as if hesitation might disrupt something carefully arranged. Inside, the lobby was quiet, polished, and impersonal. A receptionist greeted me with practiced ease and handed me a set of documents without explanation beyond the word routine. I took them and read. It did not take long to understand. The language was precise, clinical, and deeply revealing. Cognitive evaluation, assessment of decision-making capacity, authorization for guardianship in the event of impairment. Each phrase confirmed what instinct had already told me. This was not about relaxation. This was about control. I became aware of Olivia standing a few steps away, watching me, not casually, but intently, as if the outcome of everything depended on what I did next. I could feel her attention like pressure against my back. The pen rested between my fingers. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around that single point of decision. Then a voice cut through it. A man stepped closer, positioning himself just within my line of sight. His tone was low, controlled, and urgent enough to carry weight without drawing attention. He told me not to sign anything and asked me to step aside with him. There was something in his presence that spoke of authority, even without a uniform. I followed him without hesitation. He identified himself as a detective and explained that the facility was under investigation for exploiting older individuals through legal manipulation. Families brought relatives here, he said, and used the system to declare them incapable, gaining access to their assets. Then he added something that sharpened everything into focus. Olivia's name had appeared before in connection with a similar situation. I felt no panic, only clarity. I looked across the room at her. For the first time, I saw the strain beneath her composure. The carefully constructed confidence had cracks in it now. She knew something had shifted, even if she did not yet understand how much. I thanked the detective quietly and stepped back toward the center of the room, my expression unchanged. I would not confront her here. Not yet, because now I understood the structure of the trap. And once you understand how something is built, you can begin to dismantle it piece by piece. The drive back from Naperville was quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence. Olivia kept her eyes on the road, her posture rigid, her movements controlled. She asked a few casual questions about how I felt, whether the place seemed relaxing, whether I thought it might help me slow down. Her tone was carefully neutral, but there was something beneath it, a subtle probing, as if she were trying to measure how much I understood. I gave her nothing. I answered simply, without detail, without emotion. Years of professional discipline had taught me that the less you reveal, the more you retain control. She glanced at me once or twice, searching for something in my expression, but I kept it steady. By the time we pulled into the driveway, she seemed uncertain, and uncertainty, I knew, was the first crack in any plan. Inside the house, everything looked exactly as it had the day before, yet nothing felt the same. Familiar spaces can become unfamiliar very quickly once you realize they are no longer entirely yours. I moved through the room slowly, taking in small details, noting what had changed and what had not. It was not fear that guided me, but awareness. That afternoon, I began to act. I contacted an estate attorney whose name I had kept for years, someone known for handling complex cases involving asset protection and elder law. I scheduled a consultation without mentioning it to anyone in the house. I also arranged for an independent psychological evaluation through a medical practice that had no connection to Olivia or any facility she might have contacted. Documentation would be essential. If they intended to question my competence, I would establish it beyond dispute. At the same time, I reviewed every financial account I owned. I changed passwords, updated security protocols, and removed Daniel from any form of authorized access he once had. It was not an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. Trust, once compromised, cannot be treated as intact. I examined each account carefully, ensuring there were no unusual transactions or unauthorized activity. Everything had to be secured before I moved forward. Within days, the attorney helped me initiate the creation of an irrevocable trust. It was a legal structure designed to separate my assets from my personal capacity, making it nearly impossible for anyone to gain control over them, even through guardianship. I signed the preliminary documents with a calm certainty. This was no longer a precaution, it was a defense. I also hired a private investigator. His task was simple in theory, but complex in execution. I wanted a full picture of Olivia's financial behavior, her connections, and any history that might support what the detective had suggested. If there was a pattern, I intended to find it. If there was evidence, I would have it documented. At home, nothing changed on the surface. I sat at the table for dinner, listened to Olivia describe her day, and responded when appropriate. She began cooking more often, offering to help with errands, speaking with a warmth that felt carefully constructed. Daniel remained distant, moving through conversations without conviction. The three of us shared the same space, but we were no longer living the same reality. I watched. I listened. I waited. In my career, I had learned that cases are not won through emotion. They are built through patience, evidence, and timing. What I was facing now was no different. Every action had to serve a purpose. Every decision had to move me closer to certainty. This was no longer about avoiding what they had planned. It was about ensuring they would never have the chance to try again. If you're still here and you're starting to see the strategy unfold, comment number 4 below to show you're following closely. Now let's move into the moment everything finally came to light. I chose the moment carefully, Late morning, when the house was quiet and nothing competed for attention. The kitchen table had always been a place of routine, of ordinary conversations and shared meals. That day, it became something else entirely. I asked Daniel and Olivia to sit down. My voice was calm, steady, leaving no room for refusal. I had already arranged everything. The documents were placed neatly in front of me, organized in a way that reflected years of habit. Financial records, printed statements, investigative notes, and legal filings. Each piece had a purpose. Each piece would speak for itself. I began with Daniel. I laid out his debts with precision: credit balances, loan obligations, overdue payments, numbers that told a story he had been avoiding. He stared at the pages as if they belonged to someone else, his face draining of color. There was no argument, no attempt to deny it, only the quiet realization that I knew more than he had expected. Then I turned to Olivia. I moved through her financial patterns, outlining expenditures that far exceeded what Daniel's situation could support. I referenced transactions connected to the facility in Naperville, the payment that had initiated something far more serious than a simple visit. I spoke without raising my voice, without accusation, allowing the facts to settle between us. At first, she denied everything. Her tone was controlled, almost dismissive, as if the situation could still be redirected. She spoke of misunderstandings, of concern, of wanting to help me. The words were familiar, but they no longer held any weight. I let her speak. Silence, I had learned, often reveals more than a confrontation. When she finished, I reached for my phone. I pressed play. The recording filled the room with a version of her voice that carried no pretense, calm, deliberate, unmistakable. She spoke about the plan, about timing, about what would happen once I was declared incapable of managing my own affairs. Daniel's voice followed, quieter, uncertain, but present. He did not object. He did not intervene. He allowed it. The sound seemed to linger long after it ended. Daniel lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly against the table. Whatever he had told himself before, whatever justification he had relied on, it could not survive what he had just heard. The truth does not argue. It simply exists. Olivia changed. The composure she had maintained began to fracture. She did not shout. She did not need to. Her words sharpened, stripped of softness. She spoke about necessity, about pressure, about what she believed was owed. In her version of reality, this had never been betrayal. It had been strategy. I listened. There was no anger in me anymore, only a kind of clarity that felt colder than anything I had expected. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but preparation does not dull the reality of what you are forced to see. These were not strangers. This was my son. This was the woman he had chosen to build a life with. And yet, what sat across from me were two people I no longer recognized. I did not argue with her. I did not try to change her understanding. That was never the purpose of this conversation. The truth had already done what it needed to do. It had removed any remaining illusion. When I finished speaking, there was nothing left to say. The room settled into silence, heavy and complete. In that silence, I understood something with absolute certainty. There was no version of this that could be repaired. The silence that followed the recording did not break all at once. It settled slowly, like something heavy lowering itself into place. I remained seated for a moment, allowing that weight to exist without interruption. There was nothing left to reveal, nothing left to explain. The truth had already done its work. What remained was decision. I had known this moment was coming. When I finally stood, it was not out of anger or impulse. It was because the next step required clarity. and clarity demands action. I looked at Daniel first. His head was still lowered, his shoulders drawn inward, as though he could make himself smaller by refusing to meet what stood in front of him. Then I looked at Olivia. She sat upright, tense, her expression sharpened into something defensive and unyielding. I told them they would need to leave. The words were simple, direct. I gave them 30 days to find another place to live. I did not raise my voice. I did not repeat myself. The decision had already been made long before I spoke it aloud. Daniel reacted first. He looked up at me, his face strained, his eyes unsteady. He tried to speak, but whatever he intended to say did not come easily. When it did, it was fragmented, weighed down by regret. He apologized, not in a way that sought forgiveness, but in a way that revealed he finally understood the cost of what had happened. I listened, but I did not respond with comfort. There are moments when acknowledgement is all that can be offered. Olivia did not apologize. She shifted immediately into argument, her voice tightening as she questioned my decision, as if it were something that could still be negotiated. She spoke about overreaction, about misunderstanding, about how situations can be misinterpreted when emotions take control. There was a deliberate attempt to reframe everything that had just occurred, to pull the conversation back into territory she could manage. I did not follow her there. I told her that this was no longer a discussion. Trust had been broken in a way that could not be repaired through explanation or justification. What she saw as strategy, I saw as intent. And intent, once revealed, changes everything. Then I explained what I had already put in place. The trust that now held my assets was irreversible. My accounts had been secured, access removed, permissions revoked. Every measure had been taken to ensure that no external influence could alter what belonged to me. These were not reactions. They were protections, built carefully and deliberately. That was when her tone shifted again. She suggested that decisions made under pressure could be challenged, that questions about my mental capacity could still be raised. It was not a threat in the traditional sense. It was more calculated than that, an attempt to reopen a door she believed might still exist. I told her that door had already been closed. The evaluation had been completed, independent, documented, and thorough. There would be no ambiguity, no space for interpretation. If she chose to pursue that path, she would find nothing there to support her. For the first time since this began, I saw uncertainty in her. The control she had maintained began to slip, not dramatically, but enough to be visible. Daniel said nothing. He remained where he was, caught between what had been done and what could no longer be undone. I did not wait for further response. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to consider. The boundaries had been set, and they would remain exactly where they were. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in the aftermath of their own choices. Behind me, voices began to rise, not mine. And as I moved through the quiet of the house, I understood that what had once been a home shared by family had become something else entirely. A place where a line had been drawn, and where it would not be crossed again. If you're still watching, and you're wondering how far this situation will go, comment number 6 below, so I know you're still with me. Now let's move into chapter 7, where the consequences begin. The days that followed my decision unfolded with a quiet tension that never quite broke. Nothing in the house looked different at first glance, yet everything felt altered. Movements were measured, conversations minimal, and even the air seemed heavier, as though it carried the weight of what had already been said. I kept to my routines, not out of habit alone, but because structure was the only thing that kept everything from dissolving into something less controlled. Daniel began packing slowly. He worked without much direction, moving from room to room as if unsure where to begin, or how to end. There was no urgency in his actions, only a kind of resignation that settled into him with each box he filled. Olivia, on the other hand, moved differently. Her behavior shifted into something sharper, more deliberate. She left dishes in the sink longer than necessary, spoke loudly on the phone within earshot, and allowed small disruptions to linger as if they were intentional. It was not chaos. It was pressure. I did not respond. Engaging would have given her something to work with, and I had no intention of offering that. Instead, I continued exactly as I had before. I reviewed my accounts, made my calls, and kept my space in order. If she expected resistance, she did not receive it. If she expected reaction, she found none. A few days later, my attorney delivered the formal notice. It was placed in their hands without ceremony, but its presence carried more weight than anything spoken inside the house. Legal language does not argue. It defines. It establishes boundaries in a way emotion cannot. Daniel read through it quietly, his expression unchanged. Olivia reacted differently. Her disbelief surfaced first, followed quickly by anger. She questioned its validity, its timing, and the authority behind it, as though the document itself might shift under enough scrutiny. It did not. By the end of the week, she had retained her own attorney. The challenge came quickly. She attempted to contest the eviction, raising questions about my capacity, suggesting that decisions of this scale required further evaluation. It was exactly what I had anticipated. There was no surprise in it, only confirmation that she would continue until there was nothing left to pursue. The hearing was scheduled without delay. The courtroom felt familiar to me, not because I had stood in that exact space before, but because I understood its structure, order, evidence, procedure. Olivia presented her case with confidence, leaning on implication rather than proof. Her argument rested on the idea that I had been influenced, that my judgment had been compromised. Daniel sat beside her, quiet, distant, as if he no longer recognized the position he occupied. When it was my turn, I presented what had already been established. The evaluation spoke clearly. The documentation aligned without contradiction. There was no ambiguity for the court to consider. Everything had been prepared with precision, and that precision left little room for interpretation. The judge did not take long. The claims were dismissed. My competency was affirmed. The eviction stood. Outside the courtroom, Olivia's composure finally fractured. She directed her anger toward me, her words sharp and unfiltered, but they carried less force than before. Without the structure of her argument, without the illusion of control, they were simply reactions. Daniel remained silent, standing beside her without offering support, his expression marked by something closer to acceptance than resistance. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said. As I walked away, I understood that everything I needed to secure had been secured. The law had done its part. The outcome was clear, final, and unchangeable. And yet, as complete as it was, it did not restore what had been lost. The days after the court decision did not bring the kind of resolution most people expect. There was no sense of relief filling the house, no quiet return to normal. Instead, the space felt colder, as if something essential had been removed and not replaced. Daniel and Olivia were still there, their departure delayed only by the timeline I had set. We moved around one another carefully, not out of respect, but out of distance. Olivia stopped pretending entirely. Her behavior shifted from controlled performance to open hostility. She no longer attempted to maintain the appearance of care. She left things undone, spoke loudly when I was nearby, and allowed her frustration to settle into every corner of the house. It was not explosive, but it was constant. A steady pressure meant to provoke a response. I did not give her one. Engagement would have served no purpose. Everything that needed to be established had already been decided. I continued with my routines, maintaining the same structure I had relied on before any of this began. Control, I had learned, is often most visible in what you refuse to change. Daniel, however, began to change. It was not immediate, and it was not dramatic, but it was there. He started taking responsibility for small things. He cleaned areas Olivia ignored. He packed with more intention, as if he were trying to impose order on something that had already unraveled. He avoided her confrontations, stepping away rather than engaging. When he spoke to me, it was brief and careful, his words carrying the weight of someone who understood too late what had been lost. I watched without commenting. Change, if it is real, does not need to be acknowledged immediately. It needs time to prove itself. Then Olivia made one final attempt. A woman arrived at the house one afternoon, introducing herself as a representative from Adult Protective Services. The complaint, she explained, suggested that I might be under undue influence, that my recent decisions could be the result of manipulation or cognitive decline. I understood immediately where it had come from. Olivia stood nearby, composed once again, her concern carefully reconstructed. I invited the woman inside. The interview was thorough but controlled. I provided everything she asked for: the psychological evaluation, the legal documentation, a clear timeline of events. There was no need to persuade. The facts were sufficient. Daniel was questioned separately. I could not hear what he said, but when he returned, his expression was distant, his posture heavier. Olivia spoke last. Her tone carried the same measured concern I had heard before, the same carefully chosen words designed to shape perception. But something had changed. Without evidence to support her claims, her narrative had no foundation. It was performance without structure. The outcome came quickly. The case was closed. No further action required. I was found fully capable of managing my own affairs. The report was clear, final, and impossible to reinterpret. For Olivia, it was the end. There were no more avenues to pursue, no remaining strategies to attempt. The system she had tried to use had turned against her, not through punishment, but through clarity. Without ambiguity, there was no space left for manipulation. Daniel withdrew further after that. The distance between him and Olivia became visible, not through confrontation, but through absence. They spoke less. They moved separately. Whatever remained of their alignment had begun to dissolve. I remained where I had always been. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same quiet I had known before. It carried a different weight now, shaped by what had happened and what could not be undone. I had secured everything that could be protected, and in doing so, I understood something I had not expected. Safety does not restore what has already changed. The final day arrived without announcement. There was no clear moment when it began, only the quiet understanding that it had come. By mid-morning, the sound of a moving truck pulling up outside replaced the stillness that had settled over the house in recent weeks. I stood near the front window and watched as the back doors opened, revealing the empty space waiting to be filled. Daniel moved with purpose. There was a steadiness in the way he carried boxes, a focus that had been missing for a long time. He did not rush, but he did not hesitate either. Each step seemed deliberate, as if he had accepted that this was something he had to complete, regardless of how he felt about it. Olivia moved differently. She remained mostly detached, directing rather than doing, her attention fixed on details that no longer held real importance. Whatever control she had once tried to maintain was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet distance. I did not involve myself. I stayed inside, moving through the house slowly, aware of each sound as it echoed differently against the walls. The removal of their belongings changed the space in subtle ways. Rooms felt larger, emptier, as though something had been lifted out of them that could not be replaced by furniture alone. By early afternoon, most of it was done. The truck was nearly full. The house, in contrast, had returned to a version of itself I recognized, though not entirely. I stepped into the hallway and saw Daniel standing near the front door, holding a small box. He looked at me briefly, his expression difficult to define. There was regret there, certainly, but also something quieter, something closer to acceptance. He did not say much. What passed between us did not require words. Acknowledgement is sometimes enough, even when it cannot repair what has been broken. He gave a small nod before turning away, carrying the last of his things outside. Olivia did not look back. She walked through the doorway without hesitation, her posture straight, her movements controlled. There was no pause, no indication that she felt anything about what she was leaving behind. If there was emotion, it remained hidden, buried beneath the same composure she had relied on from the beginning. When the truck doors closed, the sound was final. I watched as it pulled away, followed by Daniel's car. The street returned to its usual quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. But the absence they left behind was unmistakable. Inside, the house was still. I walked from room to room, taking in the emptiness, the restored order, the quiet that now belonged entirely to me again. Everything I had worked to protect remained intact. The structure of my life had been preserved. The decisions I made had secured what could not be taken from me. And yet, there was no sense of triumph. What I had gained was clear. So was what I had lost. Justice had done its part. It had drawn the line where it needed to be drawn, enforced boundaries that could not be ignored. But justice does not rebuild what it separates. It does not return things to the way they were. I stood in the center of the living room for a long moment, listening to the silence settle fully into place. This house was mine again, but it was no longer the same home. Time did not restore what had been lost, but it did bring a kind of quiet that allowed me to think clearly again. Weeks passed, then months, and the rhythm of my life settled into something steady. The house remained unchanged in structure, yet it felt different in ways that were difficult to explain. It was quieter, yes, but also more defined, as though its purpose had been clarified along with my own. I returned to my routines without effort. Morning coffee at the same window. Financial reviews conducted with the same precision. Long afternoons spent reading or organizing documents that had once been neglected. There was comfort in that consistency, not because it erased what had happened, but because it reinforced what remained under my control. I thought often about how easily perception can be shaped. For a time, I had allowed subtle suggestions to exist without challenge. Words repeated with enough care can begin to feel like truth, even when they are not. Olivia understood that. She built her approach slowly, piece by piece, until the structure was nearly complete. What she did not understand was that I had spent too many years working with facts to mistake repetition for reality. Daniel's situation reached me gradually, not through direct contact, but through small pieces of information that surfaced over time. He had taken on additional work, balancing responsibilities that left little room for anything else. It was not an easy life, and it was not meant to be. Consequences rarely arrive in a form that allows comfort. Still, there was evidence that he was trying. Whether that effort would last was something only time could determine. Olivia's outcome was less uncertain. Her attempts to maintain control had drawn attention beyond what she could manage. Investigations followed, and while I did not involve myself in the details, the result was predictable. Without structure, without credibility, The system she relied on offered no protection. What she lost was not simply financial, it was the illusion that strategy alone could replace integrity. I considered both of them without resentment. Anger, I had learned, requires energy that is better used elsewhere. What mattered was not what they had attempted, but how I had responded. I had not been caught unprepared. I had not allowed myself to be reduced to something less than capable. That realization carried more weight than any outcome they faced. There was a time when I believed that being right would feel like victory. It does not. Being right ensures survival. It protects what cannot be replaced. But it does not restore trust, and it does not rebuild what has been broken. The cost of clarity is often higher than expected, and it is paid not in loss of assets, but in the loss of certainty about people you once believed you understood. I allowed myself to consider the possibility of speaking to Daniel again one day, not soon, and not without change that could be sustained over time. Trust, once damaged, does not return through intention alone. It requires proof, repeated consistently, until it becomes something real again. Whether that would ever happen was not something I needed to decide now. I remained where I had always been, in my home, in my life, in control of both. That, I realized, was the only outcome that truly mattered. In the end, what remains is not the conflict itself, but the clarity it leaves behind. Life has a way of revealing truth slowly, often through moments we would never choose for ourselves. When trust is tested, what truly matters is not how deeply we were hurt, but how firmly we stand in response. Strength is not found in avoiding betrayal, but in refusing to be defined by it. There is a quiet power in knowing your worth, in protecting your boundaries, and in choosing dignity over denial. Sometimes, the price of doing what is right is higher than expected, but losing yourself would cost far more. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share your thoughts, leave a comment, and follow for more stories that remind us of the strength we carry within.